All right, let's dive into a really big question for anyone building with AI right now. When is that trusty RAG system you've set up just not enough? We're going to explore exactly when and, more importantly, why you might need to make the leap to something called GraphRAG. We all see how incredibly powerful large language models are, but there's a catch, and it is a huge one. What do these models actually know about your company's private, specific data? The short answer? Absolutely nothing.
I mean, think about it. These models are trained on the public internet, and that training data is basically frozen in time. They have zero clue about your internal wikis, your latest product catalog, or what happened in your industry last week. And that blind spot? That can lead to some pretty wild hallucinations, making them totally unreliable for real-world business applications.
So, how do we fix this? Well, there are really two main paths you can take. You could try to fine-tune the entire model, but honestly, that's incredibly expensive and a total headache to keep updated. Or you can inject the context it needs in real time. This just-in-time approach is way more flexible, and it's exactly where technologies like RAG and knowledge graphs come into play. And that's the path we're going to focus on. And that brings us to the place where most projects start: retrieval augmented generation, or as we all know it, RAG. It's become the standard, the go-to solution for giving an LLM the context it needs, and the beautiful thing about it is its simplicity.
And here's why RAG is so intuitive. This analogy from the source material for this explainer just nails it. Imagine you're about to ask a really smart friend a tough question, but right before you do, you hand them a couple of key documents to read first. That, in a nutshell, is exactly what RAG is doing.
So what's happening under the hood? It's basically a two-step process. First, you've got the offline indexing phase. This is all the prep work. You take all your documents, you break them up into manageable chunks, and you store their meaning, as numbers, in this special library called a vector database. Then, when a user actually asks a question, the real-time query phase kicks in. The system zips through that database, finds the most relevant chunks of text, and feeds them to the LLM right alongside the user's question. And this approach has some major wins, which is why it's so popular. It's pretty quick and simple to set up, it's fantastic for handling huge amounts of just, plain text, and it perfectly leverages what LLMs are already great at: understanding natural language.
So, it sounds like RAG is the perfect solution for everything, right? Well, for a lot of cases it really is. But RAG does have its limits, and this is where things start to get really interesting.
This leads us right to the critical question. What happens when the answer isn't just hiding in a single piece of text? What happens when the answer is hidden in the connections between different facts? When the relationships actually matter more than just finding a similar-sounding paragraph? This is precisely where RAG can hit a wall. Its chunk-based view of the world becomes a serious limitation. So imagine you ask, which of our engineers in the London office have worked on projects with Acme Corp? RAG might find a document listing your London engineers, and it might find another one mentioning Acme Corp projects. But it's going to struggle to confidently connect that specific engineer to that specific project if that link isn't spelled out in the same chunk. It misses those subtle but absolutely critical relationships. And this is where we need a totally different way of thinking about our data: the knowledge graph. So what is it? Okay, forget about chunks of text for a second. The source material suggests thinking about it like a really sophisticated dynamic mind map for your data. It's a network of things, people, products, companies, all connected by clearly defined relationships, like works at, is a customer of, or collaborated on.
And this comparison just illustrates the difference perfectly. RAG sees your data as a library full of text. It's like a research assistant that's really good at finding relevant paragraphs. A knowledge graph, on the other hand, sees your data as an interconnected network of facts. It's like a relationship expert who can trace the connections between things to find an answer. It's a fundamental shift in how you see your information.
So, does this mean you have to choose? Do you want the research assistant or the relationship expert? Well, not anymore. This is where GraphRAG comes in, and it's all about combining the best of both worlds.
The concept here is really powerful. GraphRAG isn't about replacing what you have, it's about making it better. It still uses that fast vector search from RAG to find a good starting point in your data. But then it uses graph traversal, which literally means it follows the connections in your knowledge graph to gather a much richer, more structured context to give to the LLM. It's like finding the right file in a cabinet, but then also grabbing all the other related files from that same drawer. Okay, this all sounds great in theory, but it brings us back to the most important question of this whole explainer. When should you actually make the switch? Let's build out a clear decision framework based on the source material.
Here is the key takeaway, the strategic path you should follow. 1. Start with RAG. It should be your default, unless for some reason your data is already a perfect graph. 2. Before you jump to something new, try to improve your RAG system first. Focus on better chunking, smarter searching, and using metadata filters. And 3. Only when your questions consistently fail because they're heavily dependent on complex relationships, that's when you should make the switch to GraphRAG.
Let's just boil it down to a really simple choice. If you're dealing with a ton of text-heavy documents, like articles, PDFs, reports, start with RAG. If your data is all about connections, think supply chains, fraud detection rings, organizational charts, a knowledge graph is your natural starting point. And if you find that you need to do both, understand what's in the text, and trace those deep relationships, that is the absolute sweet spot for GraphRAG. So, as we've seen, the choice between RAG and GraphRAG isn't just about picking a tool. It's about really understanding the shape of your data and the kinds of questions you need to answer. Which leads me to this final thought for you to take away. What hidden connections in your data are just sitting there